In both Vanilla and TBC, Warlock is quite a strong choice for every aspect of the game. Vanilla, obviously, you're a strong leveler, you're a pet class, although leveling is not going to be particularly relevant to this video. In PvP, you're a bit of a monster. And in PvE, you're quite strong as well, top of the caster group with those mages, although they do outscale you. In TBC, obviously, very strong in PvP, same as Vanilla, and incredibly strong in PvE. You're going to be racing the hunters for that top spot with pretty much no competition until warriors, they get double glazed, they start to really compete with you. Is it the same in Wrath? Well, in my opinion, Warlock is actually in a better spot in Wrath than it is in Vanilla or TBC, and that's not necessarily for like a tier reason. You're not, uncontested #1 DPS by any means, but you are freed from the terrible chains that bound you in the previous 2 expansions, by which I mean you don't have to bind every button on your bar to Shadow Bolt anymore. All 3 specs actually are differentiated more so in Wrath of the Lich King, and they all have minor changes, additions, redesigns, which give each one a distinct and more dynamic rotation, which is obviously pretty amazing, especially for PvE. In PvP, you have a lot of tools, but you've sort of always had a lot of tools in PvP. The big change is the PvE rotations for Warlock. So let's do a quick overview of the 3 specs and talk a little bit about what they get, how they change. Affliction gets a couple of new, very strong abilities, most namely being UA and Haunt. If you're a healer and you're getting tired of playing the game, you want to take a little break, just dispel UA, you'll fall right over. Haunt, also very strong. You should have 100% uptime on a single target. You cannot spread taunt to multiple targets. This scales not only your dots, but also your Drain Soul. And speaking of Drain Soul, your execute is probably the strongest in the game. The longer execute phases are, the stronger Affliction will be. So that makes Affliction quite strong on prog content, overtuned content, a lot of private servers where health is scaled up. Affliction really starts to pull ahead. Still to be seen whether that's the case on Wrath Classic, or whether people will be stacking Affliction locks or not. Your AoE is quite strong, you obviously still have Seed of Corruption. In Arenas, Affliction is also similarly quite strong, probably the most versatile of the specs in Warlock for PvP. You can play in a lot of different comps, you're less tanky than you were in TBC, but you are still incredibly strong. One downside to Affliction is you have a very high ramp up time on your damage. You have 3 dots. Curse of Agony obviously ramps up. You have to stack Shadow Embrace on the target. You have to have Haunt on the target. So in 5-mans, especially when bosses are dying very quickly, this will hurt you. Obviously 5-man content is not the most difficult content in Wrath, but you will be farming a lot of normals and heroics, especially if you're going to dungeon level. So if you are planning to dungeon level, if you're farming your badges, your heroic gear, consider playing Destro or Demo. I personally would pick Demo, and we'll go into a little bit of why later. So let's talk about Destruction next, of course saving best for last. Destruction is a little bit weaker than the other 2 specs in PvE. You don't have the damage or the execute of Affliction, and you don't have the utility of Demo. It is, however, not like a total meme spec. You're not going to be racing the tanks with the arms warriors. You're not a sub-rogue. There basically are just 2 better options, so most people don't play Destruction. There are certain fights with scaling, like on private servers, Destruction can pull good damage on Thaddeus, but that's still sort of like a meme spec thing. PvP, however, Destruction is insanely fun, insanely strong, less versatile than Affliction, at least in Arenas, but absolute BG hero. If you want to farm your PvP gear, I would suggest go Destruction for Battlegrounds, just delete people. Destruction, of course, gets Chaos Bolt, you have Conflag, both abilities are pretty awesome, especially Chaos Bolt. Chaos Bolt is just insanely satisfying to cast, which I think a lot of you will learn if you do roll Warlock. Another thing to consider is that Destro is also less bad at low gear levels, and it's also quite a nice spec to play in 5-mans, just because Shadow Fury is quite useful. Alright, so of course you save best for last. Let's talk about Demo. So why should you play Demo over the other 2 specs? There's a number of reasons. Most importantly, you do get to transform into an edgy, purple-winged Shadow the Hedgehog demon. You get to, you can listen to black metal, Larpus Illidan, draw a pentagram on your computer, whatever you want. You also get to charge in and engage in glorious, honorable melee combat, which is a flex on your other Craven casters who stand at 36 yards casting magic missile or whatever. You also don't have Fell Hunter, but you do get this beautiful, shredded, little pinhead Soul Calibur anime guy. He has asymmetrical pauldrons, which, if you know anything about World of Warcraft, asymmetrical pauldrons are the coolest type of pauldrons. He also has Arcanite Reaper, which is a big plus, and he, he's going to be doing quite a bit of your damage. You should befriend him, love him as a brother, don't let him die. But other than that, which of course should be enough to convince you in itself, Demonology brings an enormous amount of utility to the raid with Demonic Pact, of course. Being the strongest spell power buff in the game, which you can easily achieve 100% uptime of. This is subjective, but I think the rotation is the most entertaining of the three. Affliction is a little bit more involved, but Demo is a lot less sweaty. You don't have to worry about snapshot and corruption. Your rogues will be happy that you aren't spam whispering them for tricks on pull. If you drop your corruption, your parse isn't going to be ruined or whatever. You also have a little bit weaker execute. You don't have to worry about managing your drain phase, which is another sweaty thing Affliction locks have to do. And also, Soulfire is, throwing meteors at the boss is a lot cooler than tickling him with a Nefet little twirly purple ribbon. Execute phase being weaker also may help you, given the tuning of Wrath Classic. That's something to be seen. If bosses die quickly, Demo with Meta Burst will be advantaged. Aside from that, you will be getting funneled gear, which is pretty cool. You get to flex on your other casters. You'll be walking out of your first Nox 25 absolutely dripping. And because you have a gear advantage during progression, that will help you sort of compete on the meters. The gear is pretty similar to Affliction as well, so if you do want to swap around and change things up, you can easily do that. So let's talk a little bit about specs. This is the spec that I would use for Tier 7. If you just want to copy this, I'm going to go into an explanation of why, a little bit about flex points. But this is the basic spec if you just want to copy it. The basic spec for Demonology Warlock is there's a skeleton, which you should basically always be taking, and then there's a couple of flex points. So let's build this up. It's pretty intuitive. We're going to be taking 2 Fell Synergy. There's really not any good talents in this row for us that are going to increase our damage over much. So you can take Hellstone. I probably wouldn't. I would just go 3 to 3 in this. The amount of times when this is going to help your raid is pretty minimal. Maybe if you're progressing and you're dying to, you're dying to Tantrum or something, you want to get this. Next, we're going to go 3 to 3 Demonic Brutality. This is going to increase Felguard's Demonic Frenzy by 3%. Really no other better options. We're also going to go 3 to 3 Fel Vitality. This is going to increase Stamina Int of our Felguard. And of course, maximum health and mana, which is not super relevant. The reason why you want this is because it scales with Demonic Knowledge. This tier, our only DPS increased talent is Demonic Aegis. This is actually quite strong. It's going to increase the flat spell power from your Fel Armor, as well as increasing the amount of conversion you get from Fel Armor, which makes Spirit more valuable for us than the other specs. We're going to get Soul Link. This is 20% damage reduction. This is going to make us tanky. In combination with the stamina, we are going to be quite tanky relative to the other specs. We're also going to get Feldom to get to the next point. This is a little bit of a quality of life increase, especially on private servers where pet pathing is a little wonky. You are going to be dismissing your pet quite a bit in 5-mans and in raids to skip trash. Resummoning it full cast time as Affliction, getting your Fel Hunter back is quite annoying. This is going to help you make your life a little bit easier. Next, we're going to get 5 out of 5 Unholy Power. This is just straightforward damage increase to your pet. Always get this. Here, only DPS increase in this tier is Conjurer. This is going to increase the combat ratings from our Spellstone and Firestone. We are going to be using Spellstone. More of our damage is direct than damage over time, but that 1% is sort of outweighed by how much more valuable haste is than crit, as well as Spellstone giving more point-for-point haste than Firestone gives crit. To get to the next tier, we're going to have to put 2 points somewhere. This is where you could take Hellstone if you want to. I would always take 1-on-1 in Mana Feed. Your pet should not be going in 25 mans, but in every other form of content, your pet will be going without this. Next, I would get Master Summoner, just because I'm a Hellstone hater, so maybe that's a personal failing of mine. Next, both of these talents are insane. We're going to get 5 out of 5 Demonologist. This is 5% damage, 5% damage reduction, so we overall have 25% flat with Soul Link as well as this. So it's pretty good. We have a Barkskin rolling 24/7. It's also nice that you don't have to put wrinkles in your brain thinking about when to press your defensive cooldowns, because you don't have any, so you just get to pump. Molten Core. This is a proc. Just get 3 out of 3. This is kind of a 1-point wonder. There's nowhere else to really put the point that's as useful, and it's going to give a pretty decent uptime of 20% attack speed to your Felguard. It also breaks stun, snare, and movement appearing effects and makes your pet immune to them for 15 seconds. This is not really that useful in PvE, but there might be some corner cases where you want to use this to, trinket your pet. Next, we're going to get Demonic Knowledge. This is obviously really good. It's just flat spell power. You should get this. Demonic Tactics is just going to increase your crit and your pet's crit. This is quite nice for activating DP. Decimation, this is our execute. You should always get 2 out of 2 of this. There's no reason not to. Another thing to notice about this is that when you read it, you might think, oh, that means that the buff is going to be consumed when I cast Soulfire. So you're going to Shadow Bolt a target at 30%. You're going to get this buff. You're going to cast a Soulfire. The Soulfire is going to consume the buff. You're going to have to cast another Shadow Bolt and go between. That actually is, as far as I know, that actually is how this used to work in previous patches. But in 3.3.5, this buff will actually just linger on you for 10 seconds, which is quite nice. It allows you to just spam Soulfire forever, basically. And there's also a little trick with this where you can hit adds at below 35% health, proc this, and then you get 10 seconds of execute. Next, we're going to get Felguard. Felguard is the strongest pet we can choose. No reason not to get this. We're going to go 5 out of 5 Demonic Pact. This is really our reason, our biggest reason to be going down this tree. It's 10% spell damage flat on you, which is obviously quite nice. And then your pet criticals apply Demonic Pact to your part of your raid members. Demonic Pact increases spell power by 10% of your spell damage for 45 seconds. So whatever your spell power is, if you have unused trinkets, you have procs, it's just going to snapshot that and give 10% to everybody in your raid. This is insane, really kind of bonkers. It scales with your gear, which is nutty. This is like why you're. This is what guarantees your raid spot. Next, we're going to take meta. We have to get here for Demonic Pact anyway, so there's no reason not to take this. We're also next we're going to want to be getting Ruin out of Destruction, so we need 15 points. There's pretty easy 2 options. We're going to get 5 out of 5 Shadow Bolt. This is our 5% crit debuff on the boss. It also increases Shadow Bolt damage by 10%, which is a nice passive. We're going to get Bane. This is going to decrease cast time of a lot of our major spells. Ruin, pretty insane, 100% crit damage. This scales multiplicatively with your meta gem, which makes it even better. So now, this is basically the skeleton. We have 5 flex points left. In tier 7, I think it's going to be pretty obvious what the best build is going to be. And that's going to be 3 out of 3 suppression, 2 out of 2 nemesis. Potentially, if getting an extra 10% on your nemesis allows you to get an extra metamorphosis in the fight, this could be better. But that's fight dependent. You really do want to be getting hit cap, and in tier 7, especially, if you're having gearing issues, like you can't get the VH trinket to drop, which is a big hit bonus, things like that, you don't want to be having to gem full hit, and suppression is just point for point very, very strong. This is what I would use probably 95% of the time when I'm walking into my first 25 mans. In 5 mans, I might go here. just because you want to be using Metamorphosis on cooldown for trash. Immolation Aura is just so strong, you know, it's a lot of fun, etc., and you don't really need to hit so much. There's also some other decisions. If you really, you know, later in the tiers where you have a lot of hit rating and you might not necessarily need this, you can go 2 points in pushback. You should have Imp Conk Aura, and pushback is, you know, I don't think this is ever going to really be better point for point than Demonic Tactics, which is your other option. Demonic Tactics just increases your pet's crit. This, you might look at this initially, and if you haven't really played Demo, you might think, well, we need as much pet crit as we can get, right? Because we need to have Demonic Pact up all the time. This is not necessarily true for a number of reasons. One, your pet is going to have like 25% crit on its melees, just in sort of like previous gear in 25 mans. That's enough to keep this up 100% of the time easily. And the reason why is that its duration is 25 seconds longer than its ICD. So Demonic Pact uptime is not something you really have to be worrying about with respect to your pet's crit rating. So if you really don't want to get suppression, if your gearing is such a way that you have too much hit, I would just go Demonic Tactics over pushback. And that's basically the spec. There is another sort of a meme spec where you go and you get Conflag. So this is the hybrid Demonology Destruction spec, and you also go Imp. This spec is a little bit of a meme spec. It actually can do pretty insane damage on private servers, but you obviously don't get Demonic Pact, which is a pretty huge reason why you were going to be bringing a Demo Warlock anyways. So that's kind of a little bit of a bummer there. You do get Soulfire for your execute, which is kind of cool. This is a spec you could play around with, just if you want to have some fun. I don't think it's going to be better than Affliction or Deep Demo. Alright, so let's do just a quick overview of glyphs. Glyphing for Demonology is pretty simple. Glyph of Life Tap, this is just like completely insane. It's going to give you 20% of your Spirit spell power. You're going to be stacking Spirit anyways because of your Fell Armor and because of how valuable flat spell power is to you. Just get this, put it in your glyph book, never think about ever taking it out ever again, and keep 100% uptime on this, which you should have anyways. Next, Glyph of Felguard. On a lot of private servers, pet scaling is like kind of broken, so your pets don't do very much damage. On Wrath Classic, that should not be the case. Your Felguard should be smacking. It should be doing, you know, like 13% of your damage with its melee, and Cleave should be doing, you know, 4 or 5%, something like that. Glyph of Felguard is going to increase attack power by 20%. Obviously, your Felguard should be getting all the attack power buffs in Raid, and this is going to scale those. Next, Glyph of Quick Decay. This is probably the best single target choice, depending on the fight. This is really the glyph slot that you should be thinking about changing, because Glyph of Metamorphosis is also quite strong for a number of reasons. Glyph of Metamorphosis increases the duration of your Metamorphosis by 6 seconds. The reason why that is significant is because your Immolation Aura, which you can only cast during Metamorphosis, has a 30-second cooldown, and obviously the base duration of Metamorphosis is 30 seconds, which means you will only be able to cast one Immolation Aura during an unglyphed Metamorphosis. If you glyph Metamorphosis, you will be able to cast a second Immolation Aura if you cast your Immo Aura immediately on Transformation. But the buff does fall off when Metamorphosis drops, and because Immolation has a 12-second duration, you'll only be getting half of your Immolation Aura. But still, if you can work a fight out so that both of those Immolation Auras are going to be hitting multiple targets, that glyph becomes insanely valuable. Glyph of Quick Decay. At low haste values, obviously this is going to be doing less for you. More ticks of Corruption. Well, Corruption itself doesn't do as much damage as it will, obviously, for an Affliction lock. The ticks do proc Molten Core, so it does increase the value of this glyph significantly. This is probably, for most fights going to be the best setup, but keep in mind that Glyph of Metamorphosis can be strong, and look for situations where that double Immolation Aura is going to be useful. In 5-mans, I would probably take off Glyph of Quick Decay for Glyph of Metamorphosis, and I would ensure to be talented into Nemesis 3 out of 3, just because you want to be maximizing the amount of time you spend in meta, and you want to be maximizing the amount of time you can be cleaving with Immolation Aura. You know, you're going to be having a lot of fun in heroics and, you know, in normals and stuff, immolating things. So the more you can do that, the better. You won't be wanting to AFK and /follow in 5-mans with this build because, you know, your cleave is just a lot of fun. Alright, now we've done glyphs and talents, let's go over the basic rotation. You don't have a rotation, you have a priority list. And like pretty much every other Warlock spec, your number one priority is going to be 100% dot uptime. Your dots are going to be Immolate and Corruption, so you're going to be wanting to put those up ASAP. You also have Curse of Doom as your damage curse. If you do not have a Boomy or an Unholy Decay, you will be putting up Curse of Elements. It's better for you to put up Curse of Elements than it is for an Affliction Lock, because Affliction Locks obviously have a lot more scaling on their Curse of Agony than you do on your Curse of Doom. So it's more of a DPS loss for them. But you should be having a Boomy or an Unholy Decay in your comp. If you don't, you know, your raid leader is messing up. Especially Unholy Decay, because they can apply Curse of Elements in an AoE on trash, and that 13% magic damage is going to be pretty huge. So, again, you don't have a rotation, you have a priority. Your priority is dots, Curse of Doom, and then your filler is Shadow Bolt. And you're going to be spamming that Shadow Bolt. While you're spamming your Shadow Bolt, you're going to be watching for Molten Core procs. As you can see, I just procced it there. When you get Molten Core procs, you're going to be wanting to incinerate those away as soon as possible. You don't want to be, you know, not paying attention, missing your proc, casting an extra Shadow Bolt. You don't consume that stack, then you get overwritten by another proc. That's a big damage loss, so just pay attention to that. Once the target gets below 35%, you're going to be proccing Decimation. The way Decimation procs is it procs on hit from your filler abilities. So if you're watching boss percentage and you see that, you know, your next Shadow Bolt, considering travel time, is going to hit at 35%, you don't necessarily want to instantly queue up a Soulfire. The reason for that is, if you, for example, shoot off a Shadow Bolt, the boss is at 34%, I immediately queue up a Soulfire after that Shadow Bolt, I'm going to be getting base cast time, and I'm not going to be benefiting from that haste. You actually have to wait for the Shadow Bolt to hit, so you're going to be wanting to queue up a second Shadow Bolt and then queue up a Soulfire. This is another reason why you want to be closer to the boss than max range, other than just Immolation Aura. You know, your travel time on your spells does matter for Decimation. Another little trick with Decimation is that you, again, should be looking out for adds that you can throw out a Shadow Bolt on when they're below 35%, just to proc this to get a little bit of a damage increase for 10 seconds. So that's the basic priority list. During Execute, just remember that your Molten Core actually does affect your Soulfire as well, so you don't need to be incinerating during Execute. Something else to consider with Soulfire is to remember to have extra shards in your bag during raid. The reason for that is that if you have Decimation up and you finish casting a Soulfire after it drops, you will consume a shard. And if you do not have any shards in your bag, the Soulfire will just not go off, and you'll lose a lot of damage that way. Before we talk about the opener, we're going to need to discuss a little bit about Demonic Pact, because a lot of our opener is going to be structured around Demonic Pact. The reason for that is Demonic Pact will snapshot your current spell power, and of course it does proc off of your pet crits. So our opener is going to be focused around getting a maximal Demonic Pact snapshot, and the way that we're going to be able to do that is by tracking our spell power procs are on use, things like Blood Fury, And we're going to be stacking all those up before we send our pet in. So on pull, obviously we're going to be pre-potting. We're going to be pre-potting Wild Magic, because Wild Magic, while Wild Magic is a personal DPS loss over Potion of Speed, just because haste is so valuable to us, the 200 spell power from Wild Magic will be baked into our initial DP snapshot, so that's going to be 20 spell power to the whole raid. So that's why we're going to be pre-potting Wild Magic. Our second pot, you're probably just going to be potting speed. We're going to be wanting to, on 4 or 5 seconds of the pull timer, you're going to be wanting to life tap to get your glyph up. And then we're going to be precasting. What I would precast is Shadow Bolt. Soulfire is probably a DPS increase, a personal DPS increase rather, but it's quite important that you put up improved Shadow Bolt as soon as possible. Affliction Locks will also probably be precasting Shadow Bolt, and they will have this talent simply because they want to snapshot the 5% crit into their corruption. But it's important that this buff is applied as soon as possible, so I prefer to precast Shadow Bolt. If you really want to sweat, you can precast Soulfire. So again, we're going to be pre-potting, we're going to be putting up Life Tap, we're going to be precasting, we're going to be Shadow Bolting, we're going to be putting our dots and curse up, and as you can see here, this is what I'm waiting for. I'm waiting to see my spell power proc. So I've procced my cloak, I have a Sundial, but Sundial, at least on this server, has a kind of a low proc chance, so I personally would not be waiting for this to proc. I would be waiting for my cloak. Once I see that cloak proc, I'm going to be using my on use. I don't have an on use trinket equipped right now, but I'll be using Blood Fury. And then as soon as you get all those things stacked up, you're going to want to send your pet in. You really do not want to have your pet on defensive. You want to be micromanaging when you send your pet in, because as you can see here, this is weak aura tracks DP. As soon as you send your pet in the first few swings, you should be critting, and you should be putting this up. So the most important thing to consider with the opener, the order of how you put your dots up, all that stuff, that really doesn't matter. What you should be looking for in your opener is maximizing that DP snapshot. So anything that can help you do that is good. You should be having weak auras to track your ICDs, your trinkets, your procs, your DP, etc. So again, let's go over the opener one more time. What we're going to be doing is pull timers at 4 or 5 seconds. We're going to be putting up our life tap. We're going to be pre-potting Wild Magic. We're going to be pre-casting Shadow Bolt. We're going to be putting up We're going to be precasting Shadow Bolt. We're going to be putting up Immolate, Corruption, Curse of Doom. We're going to be waiting for our procs. When we see our procs, we're going to be using our on use, and then we're going to be sending our pet in. So that's basically the opener. Not too complicated, but just remember it is quite important to snapshot correctly. Next, I'm going to talk a little bit about tracking Demonic Pact throughout the fight and doing sort of like a mini snapshot. One of the most important things you can have as a demo lock is a way of tracking Demonic Pact uptime. I have a weak aura here, which, as you can see, when Demonic Pact applies, it has a duration, and it also has the total value and spell power of the Demonic Pact. Another functionality that this weak aura has is this number up here. If it's in green, it means that I currently have enough spell power to apply a Demonic Pact, which is going to be 5 bigger than the one I have currently. When it's red, it means it's less, so this is just a useful thing to have when you're looking to snapshot. The way that Demonic Pact works with its duration being considerably longer than its ICD, you are going to be wanting to sort of min-max each individual snapshot every 20 seconds. Obviously, this is a big reason why you need to track duration, because when your Demonic Pact gets to 25 seconds, you need to be ensuring that you have any temporary spell power buffs that are available to you activated. You're going to be wanting to make sure you have Glyph of Life Tap up. You're going to be making sure you sort of synchronize it with your procs and your on use. And a way that you can differentiate yourself from other demo locks is this DP micromanagement. It's another very good reason to not have your pet on defensive and manage it manually, because you can actually sometimes gain raid DPS by snapshotting a big DP and then actually pulling your pet off of the boss for 10-15 seconds to let that big spell power buff linger, and then send your pet back in to proc a new one. This is not something that I can really tell you, like, this is exactly how you should play with DP all the time. It's very situational. It depends a lot on your raid comp, how many casters you have, whether or not losing your pet DPS is going to be net benefit for the raid. And that's something you can math out for your own personal benefit. If you don't want to sweat too much, just leave your pet on the boss and don't worry about it. Something else I want to cover quickly is movement. Movement for pretty much all casters in Wrath of the Lich King is a massive DPS loss. This is no exception for Warlock. We don't really have good instants, so you really want to be maximizing your portal. There's a good place, good uses for portal on most fights. Something you'll have to figure out yourself. I'm not going to handhold you through that, but another thing to mention is there's a few things that you can do while moving to optimize your damage. One thing is obviously putting your dots up. Those are our powerful instants. Corruption has a pretty low duration. It's likely that you'll be able to put it up when you're moving. Try not to clip it. Curse of Doom has a quite long duration. It's unlikely you're going to be moving while refreshing Curse of Doom. The only other thing that you can really use is Shadow Flame. You should have it bound. You should be using it on bosses where it's possible. A good example of that is Thaddeus. If you can imagine, this signpost is Thaddeus, and we're positive. We get a polarity shift. We run through the boss with Shadow Flame. It's a little bit of a DPS increase. Not too big of a deal. The biggest thing for movement is optimizing our life taps. Life tap is a pretty powerful instant that we are going to be using throughout the fight. Your main filler abilities do mana burn you, even in 4K gear score. Sort of halfway to tier 7 bis. My Shadow Bolt takes 4% of my mana. You will be life tapping throughout the fight. A good technique to use, which will differentiate you from other warlocks, is to sort of pool your missing mana and save those life taps up for when you have to move, so that you don't have to waste globals. Something else to mention about this is the tier 7 4 piece. This will change slightly how your life tap functions. It makes every life tap give you 10 seconds of like 180 spell power. When you have this 4 set, it's useful sometimes to just spread your life taps out a little bit more. Normally you'd want to be clustering them when you do not have procs active and when you have to move, but with 4 set, staggering them a little bit will give you a DPS increase. It's also useful to keep this up when you'll be snapshotting your DP. So that's movement, pretty simple. Try to move as little as possible. Anything you can possibly do not to have to move is going to be a massive DPS increase. Right, so we talked about priority list and your opener and your execute phase. Let's talk about AoE. For Warlocks, AoE is pretty simple. When in doubt, just spam Seed of Corruption. Especially for like Affliction, that's pretty much all you're going to be doing. You're back to your 1 button days. Although for Affliction, the way that Eradication works, you also do, especially on smaller pulls, want to be throwing out 1 or 2 corruptions before you start spamming Seed, obviously on targets that don't have corruption, because you can proc 20% haste. Especially useful because Seed of Corruption can do so much snap threat. You don't necessarily want to be pre-casting Seed if your tanks are not on the ball, or your paladins don't have brains and haven't bound Salvation or Blessing of Protection. For Demonology, this has changed a little bit just because of Metamorphosis. You do want to be getting into melee range when you have meta, and you want to be using your Immolation Aura and then spamming Seed. There also is a little bit of a min-max you can do with Shadow Cleave, which you should have macroed into your abilities. Your spells will reset your swing timer probably, but when you're going in and you're popping Immolation Aura, you do have sort of a GCD free where you can use a Shadow Cleave, which is just going to be a little tiny bit of a DPS increase. On private servers, it doesn't do very much damage, but it is something to mention. You do want to be using your meta and your Immolation Aura on cooldown and AoE packs. It's like an insane amount of overall damage. You know, if you want to really parse, don't use it 2 minutes before a boss fight. But honestly, it's a lot of fun. Just use your meta. The only downside to this meta playstyle on AoE pulls is that you will be ripping threat. You know, the only one who can really compete with your burst threat is Feral Druid. If they're, you know, pooling energy, they're zerking, they're swiping, you know, they're going to rip threat and die. So just be careful with that. Make sure your paladins are bopping you, salving you. Make sure your tanks are on the ball with threat. Another little upside to Metamorphosis that I didn't discuss before, which is going to be more relevant in 5-man content than raids, is that it increases your armor quite significantly, and it also reduces your chance to be crit. So if you do end up ripping threat, this does make you noticeably more tanky, especially in like normals and heroics. So you can take a few hits, which is nice. Right, so we've gone over the rotation and the ideal opener. Let's talk a little bit about races. Races for Warlock is pretty easy. There's really not much choice. If you're Horde, you know, you're going to be Zugging, you're going to be going Orc. If you're Alliance, you're going to be rerolling Horde. If you're a Plebeian and you don't want to reroll Horde, then you should go Human. The Alliance racials for Warlock are pretty bad, but Human is obviously really, really good for PvP, and you should be PvPing because PvP is fun. So that's races. Again, pretty simple. There's basically only one choice. For stat priorities, I hesitate to give like stat weights because it obviously changes with your gear. And Demonology is a little bit different than the other specs just because of Demonic Pact. The value of spell power is going to be pretty variable depending on your raid comp and how good at the game your casters are. You know, obviously if you're in a raid of 24 mages and your spell power is going to be dramatically more valuable because every single person in your raid is going to be benefiting from each additional point of spell power in your Demonic Pact. If you're in a raid with 24 melee, God help your soul, you don't really want to be focusing as much on spell power, you want to be getting hit cap. But the basic stat priority is the same for Affliction and Demonology. It's you want to be getting hit cap, then you want to be getting spell power, and you want to be getting haste over crit. Crit is the least valuable stat by quite a bit. Haste is decently valuable. Spell power is quite valuable, and for both Affliction and Demonology, Spirit is converted via Fell Armor and Glyph of Life tap to spell power. Demonology locks have improved armor, so you get 9% more of your Spirit to spell power. So every Spirit point on your gear, you can basically just see that as 0.59 spell power and calculate it that way. It is quite nice to be able to use healer gear, especially if you're in heroics. I would suggest a little gearing tip. Take a Holy Paladin to your 5-mans, and you can soak up the Spirit gear. Also, you know, Holy Paladins are just really good. So that's stat priorities. Again, don't really focus on stat weights too much. It's really kind of a meme, a little bit of a trap. You should be evaluating your spell power stacking versus hit cap based on your raid DPS, how many casters you have in your raid, etc. Alright, next we're going to be talking a little bit about consumables. Because of Demonic Pact, flat spell power is going to be really good. This is a little bit of a upside quality of life thing. You can just use Fish Feast for food. For Flask, you're going to be using Spell Power Flask. For your, you know, which is a benefit over Affliction because you don't have to, you know, buy haste food or hit food. For potions, obviously, as we talked about in the opener, you're going to be pre-potting Wild Magic. Your second pot is probably going to be speed. If you really want to sweat, you can time a Wild Magic pot with both a DP snapshot and execute phase. That can be quite powerful as well. But that haste is really going to be valuable. So that's consumables. Alright, now that we've discussed stat weights, let's talk a little bit about professions. As always in Wrath, this is going to be a common refrain. Engineering is just really good. Nitro boots, a big weakness of Warlock, this is across all the specs, is you have very low mobility. You have a charge in your demon form, but you shouldn't really be using that. It's just a wasted global. So having Nitro boots is pretty insane. Every 3 minutes you'll be finding a use for this. It's nice in 5-mans, it's nice in PvP, obviously, it's nice in raids. You can do skips with it if you're a sweaty speedrunner. Every fight there's a use for this. The 24 crit on Nitro boots, which are not in the tooltip, is also nice, although crit is quite a low value stat for you. You would rather have the 12 crit, 12 hit boots or the minor speed. If you're really like super sweaty, because your prebis is this rep item, you can actually just buy 2 of them and have one with nitro and one with minor speed if you do want to have that 8%, whatever you want it for. It can be nice to have. So I personally, engineering, especially for demo, because you have such value in flat spell power, there could be an argument made for like JC blacksmithing or JC plus some flat spell power profession or JC plus tailoring. I personally would just never play Wrath of the Lich King without engineering. I don't care if it's a DPS loss. The quality of life is so good. Just the auction house in Dalaran, like how could you miss out on that? It's insane. So my personal feeling, which, is based on my infinite wisdom, is that you should go engineering. Your second profession, JC is probably mathematically BIS, but personally I'd go tailoring. There's a number of reasons for this. On private servers, the proc rate for embroidery is really high. It basically procs instantly on ICD, which is pretty good. In Wrath Classic, it has to be seen, obviously, what the proc rate for this is. It can go up and down in value based on uptime. In 5-mans, it's actually pretty good because, your uptime on this is going to be really high, given that packs are going to die in like 15 seconds. So that's kind of irrelevant, though, because 5-mans don't matter. So personally, I go engineering tailoring. Another benefit to tailoring is you get to be cheap. You don't have to buy epic spell thread, which is actually quite good for you, given that you benefit both from spell power and spirit. You really don't want to be having your blue spell thread, getting shit talked by your guildies. So that's my personal feeling, engineering tailoring or engineering jewel crafting. If you want to swap your professions around to make money, just, pick a profession that has a flat spell power benefit, like something like alchemy or whatever. It's not terrible. Enchanting is not terrible. Blacksmithing is not terrible. The difference between having that flat spell power, though, and having something like a gathering profession is quite large, especially given how DP scales. So it is actually, pretty important to have those. There probably is a mathematically perfect combination of professions, but who cares? Just go engineering. Another thing about engineering is the glove enchant is pretty decent for you. Haste is obviously quite valuable. The 1-minute cooldown doesn't sync up perfectly with your cooldowns, but you use it on pull. Maybe you're metaing on pull. You use it again, and then your next meta, if you have talented, you're just gonna have to wait 10 seconds and then use your gloves. Other than that, using your professions to make gold is kind of a cope in Wrath of the Lich King. There's so many good farms. Just use professions that are BIS for the kind of content that you actually want to play. So that's professions. Similar things you're going to be hearing with a lot of classes. Engineering, jewel crafting is like probably the best. If you just want to, not think about your professions, just go NG jewel crafting, and you should be fine on pretty much every class. Next, we're going to be talking about enchants a little bit. This is really just sort of a soapbox moment for me. Most of the enchants are obvious. You're going to get spell power when you can. If you can't get spell power, you're going to get hit or haste or whatever is available. There's really no like complicated math to be done here, especially for demonology because spell power is so valuable. But what I really want to talk about is Hodir and your rep head enchant. Kirantor head is pretty easy to get. At least on private servers, we're pretty spoiled. A lot of private servers have high rep rates or instant rep for Hodir. On Classic, you really are going to be hating your life. Do not grind your soul into the dust and destroy your love for life and the game trying to farm out Hodir on release. Depending on how sharding works, there's going to be some quests that are going to be hard bottlenecks for Hodir. Like if you're really going to be flying around with 10,000 other people in Storm Peaks looking for like or victorious combatants or whatever. You know, it's like you're gonna be hating your life. You're gonna be wanting to do bad things IRL. Just, you know, unless you have literal infinite gold and infinite time, which you do not have, spend your gold and your time doing things that are going to benefit you more than just like 15 crit. The TBC shoulder enchants are not terrible. I mean, the Shatar head enchant isn't terrible. It gives you hit rather than crit, which is obviously nice. Just get the Winter Grasp enchant or get the TBC one and wait until Hodir is easier to do the quest and cheaper to buy the rep turn-ins, and spend your time and your gold, you know, buy a BOE, you know, do some more heroics, get all your badge gear, you know, don't do something entertaining and fun. Anyways, that's that soapbox over. I also want to talk a little bit about previous gearing. There's one little tip that I think is important for warlocks to know about. Your egg, which is the healer badge trinket, is actually incredibly powerful for warlocks because, and I'm 99% sure this is Blizz-like and going to be in Wrath, it will actually proc off of Fel Synergy as well as Siphon Life, and of course like Drain Life, things like that. It has a high proc rate as well, and the 505 haste rating is obviously quite strong. I would suggest just run your heroics, get your badge gear, get both of these trinkets, especially if you can't get Violet Hold on-use trinket to drop. If I had that, I would probably replace Sundial with it, to be honest, just because the on-use is a lot more reliable to snapshot with. And of course, hit rating is going to be dramatically more valuable than crit rating. Another thing, again, take a non-spirit healer to your group. Try to get 5-mans with melees. Gearing is quite easy, and if you really don't have the time to smash through heroics, if you have a decent guild, max 10 is a loot pinata. Even if it's tuned really heavily, it's still going to be incredibly easy. You can go in there with like terrible gear and come out with gear that's slightly better than heroic gear. So don't worry too much about gearing, unless you really are like going for realm first or you really want to sweat. Max 10 is a loot pinata. Alright, so now that we've talked about a little bit about gearing and enchants, I want to finish off just by discussing weak auras and add-ons. In Wrath Classic, there's obviously a much larger community of people building weak auras. You know, you have a lot better API for your nameplates. You know, it's taken me a long time to get my nameplates not to look like total ass on the 335 client. So this should be a lot easier for you as a classic player than it is for private server players, but it's very important to have basic weak auras that are central in your UI, where you can actually look at them without looking away from your character standing in void zones or what have you. Very important weak auras that you absolutely should have if you want to. Dot trackers, this is a pretty obvious one. You want to see when your dots are about to fall off so that you can refresh them immediately without clipping. You also want to have a, this is specific to Demolock, you absolutely must have a DP tracker. Other than that, you know, you want to have trackers for your trinket and you know, your cloak ICD, things like that. Aside from those basic weak auras, it's really personal preference. When it comes to macros for Demonology, there's not too much. There are a couple of things that are useful to have. I personally do not macro gloves into an ability just because, you know, you want to have it adds a layer of complexity to your rotation, syncing it up with things. But if you don't want to do that, macro it in, it's not too much of a loss. The same thing is true for demonic empowerment. Obviously, we talked about that in the talent section. I personally do not macro this into my abilities, but you absolutely can. Something that I would macro into my abilities is Shadow Cleave. The reason for this is, especially on private servers, it really doesn't do that much damage. And because your swing is going to be reset, this is very rarely going to go out. It also, on private servers, does use your unarmed weapon skill to hit. So you will, if you want to use Shadow Cleave, have to go out and punch mobs and get that skill up, which is kind of a cartoonish waste of time that you have to do. I macro Immolation Aura into my Metamorphosis, which is just a quality of life thing where you press it twice to get an aura, so I don't have to have separate binds. So that's basically it for macros. Most of your macros obviously are going to be for PvP, you know, you're going to have your arena target macros, things like that. For PvE, there's really not too much. Just remember to have your things like Shadow Ward Bound and, you know, be using your coil to self-heal. So there we have it, a quick, or maybe not so quick guide to Demonology Warlock. I hope I've been successful in converting you to degenerate demon worship, friendship with the Felguard race. Frankly, upon closing this video, you should already be going to Hot Topic, putting on eye makeup, listening to black metal, and sacrificing goats to the Twisting Nether in preparation for Wrath Classic, just to get into the Warlock mindset. Warlock is a great class to main. I hope you join me in Purple Gang. Good luck in Classic, and see you in Northrend.